people try to suggest other words, like we're not going to get rid of the concept, necessarily, because it's this concept of I looked like this and I want to look like this, and now that I have done X, Y, Z and I look like that, I'm happy with that and there's nothing wrong with it. And I agree. It's not for everybody, but for the people that it is for, it's great. Now, I agree with you that when people want to be nice and they don't want to, they're not trying to offend you or anybody else, but when they say something like, oh, I never would have known, or, I mean, I've even had someone say, oh, my God, I just thought you were a guy, and I'm like, well, I am. You know what I mean? Like, it's those things where it's like, and the immediate reaction, of course, is, well, that's not what I meant, right? And so, I think that I've read a lot of blogs where people try to suggest other words. Like, it's not that you're passing as a man because you are a man. It's that you're being read as a man, right? Or they'll try to use other words in place of it to try to take the stigma out of, or to try to take the connotation of deception out of the name of the concept. But I think that the other thing that you kind of touched on as well is the thing about that you do have that privilege of being seen as a man in most places where some people don't. And I share that privilege. I also share the privilege of mostly being read as a gay man. I mean, there have been times at work when, there will be somebody new that I've worked with, and this happened a couple of years ago with someone who's now a very dear friend, who we were all in mixed company, and we were hanging out, and she had been working there for a little while and had made her own assumptions about me. And at one point I was talking, and I said something about my wife, and, after the happy hour, we went on our way, and one of them looked at the other and said, I'm so confused. I thought he was gay. And, it was one of those moments where it was like, I recognize, and I joke all the time, that ever since I transitioned, I've stopped being flirted with or hit on by women, and now I only get flirted with or hit on by men. And I really don't care because I'm taken one way or the other. It's flattering regardless. What you say to me after I tell you I'm trans isn't always flattering, but I absolutely I definitely share that privilege with you. So, and it is tough because you want to feel like, when I was younger in my transition and people came to me and said, oh, God, I never would have known, or, when there was the automatic assumption that I was male, no questions asked, it did feel good because it felt like all the hard work and all the stress that I had been through before was either worth it or that it was starting to subside and all of that kind of stuff. And so it was nice to hear. But then once you get past it's almost like that triangle, and I always forget what it's called, but it's like that pyramid of basic needs of that you take care of food and shelter first, and then you take care of this and that and the other, and final is self-actualization. Once we are not worried as much about our safety, right, or being seen as something that we maybe don't like in ourselves or maybe even hate in ourselves, then we can start kind of dissecting the issues that surround our lives every day. And I've talked to so many trans guys. I don't know if you have a similar experience that just like what you said or what I'm saying is that, at first it was very important to me, but now I'm more important about what can I do to make my life a happy one and how can I just be comfortable in my own skin. And I'm more worried about my marriage and my job than I am about X, Y, Z. Do you feel like that feeling of yours, do you hear that resonated, throughout the rest of the trans community with folks that you work with, that you're friends with, and things like that?
I mean, I think definitely there are some folks who have had similar experiences, but I mean, I don't know if this is true for you, Eli, but it's definitely true for me. Like some of the things that made me feel more comfortable were being able to take tea, or being able to have medical services that affirmed my gender and my gender identity. And so passing is also inextricably tied, or is often just so tied to access to medical care, to access to just basically having money, right? Having a social safety net through your family or through your school or through some kind of institution. And so that means folks like me who are able to transition, I don't think about the fact that I'm passing on a day-to-day basis. Like, right, that's what privilege is. You don't have to think about it. It's just there. But the only reason that I have that is because I was able to stay on my parents' health insurance and they were supportive of me being trans, that I was at a school that was relatively trans-friendly, that I was able to find resources and find people to connect me, right? So, like, the idea of passing is just absolutely tied to all of the other issues that the trans community faces in that, like, if you're part of a marginalized community, right, if you're from a low-income background, the likelihood that you're going to be able to access medical care if you want to access medical care is really low, right, or safe medical care. And so, you know, a lot of the folks that I know who are trans and are working in the movement have similar stories. Some of them don't if they haven't come from a background of privilege. But that's one of the things that's so frustrating, right? If passing in some ways is directly linked to safety, right? If it's directly linked to me not assaulted on the street or me not getting fired from a job, the fact that I can pass others can't just because I've had access to health care, it's a really frustrating thing. I don't know how better to articulate it other than that.
Yeah, no. I absolutely agree with you. I'm hoping that things start to get better, but I feel like healthcare is one of the number one issues. I mean, homelessness, healthcare, these are two, in my opinion. Homelessness, healthcare, and then, of course, you have equal opportunity for employment. These are all, I feel, inextricably tied together, and they seriously and just heavily weigh on the trans community. And so I absolutely agree with you, and it's difficult to kind of extricate passing from all of that or being read as how you want to be read from all of that when, you know, if you don't have those kind of safety nets, whether it's social or even a place safe to go every day to lay your head at night or, you know, some way to pay your bills, I mean, you know, passing at that level is, you know, I feel like the more lower income that you are, oftentimes passing can be more important than if you aren't, if you have those kind of privileges. Because of the fact that you can go, well, if these people don't like me because I'm trans, well, then I don't want that job, right? Well, what if it's the only job you can get, right? Yeah. And so I absolutely agree with you, and am, you know, very much in touch with folks that are having that issue right now. I will say that for those of you in the D.C. area, there was a major shift in healthcare today. John, were you involved in some way with some of what's going on with healthcare in D.C.?
No, I wasn't, but a lot of the folks, I was just about to mention that, Eli, just to give a shout-out to the National Center for Transgender Equality and the Center for American Progress, Andy Bowen, Kellen Baker, you know, another, second Andy, whose last name I can't remember, and he'll hate me for it later, but like a bunch of really, really incredible people who have been doing advocacy, working with the D.C. government, and now all healthcare, the way that I understand it, and I could be wrong, but all healthcare providers, all insurance providers in the District of Columbia have to include gender identity, gender-affirming related coverage. So everything from surgery to hormones, which is incredible and groundbreaking. It's happened in a couple of other locations, but it's definitely big news here in D.C. today.
Yeah, and there was legislation previously that kind of helped with some of the private sector insurances, but I believe that today's movement, the biggest thing that it also included, and I could be wrong, correct me if you know differently, is that it also now includes federal, like, employees and Medicaid and things like that were kind of, if I'm not mistaken, left out of that last piece of legislation. Previously, the legislation said, if you were going to cover it for cisgender people, you have to cover it for transgender people. You can't not cover it simply because they're trans. Whereas today's legislation took one step further and said you have to cover SRS, I believe they even use the terminology of SRS procedures, like you said, surgeries and hormones and things like that. And that's a huge step forward for DC, and it's a huge accomplishment for folks like you, who you were talking about with NCTE and Ruby Corrado and Andy Bowen. For our listeners, if you recall, Andy was our guest co-host when she came on to talk about the legislative landscape for the trans community back in, I believe it was November. So folks, our listeners are familiar with Andy, and that was such a great show. And I just always am amazed that the people that I'm friends with, the people that I've worked with, the things that we get done in the District of Columbia and the surrounding areas. It's just been amazing. So I think go for it.
The other Andy that I messed up his name, Andy Cray, who's a great guy who works at the Firming.
Yeah, I swear I feel like I am kind of, I know that I won't always be in D.C., and I am just trying to soak it in, the ability to not go very far without running into a host of a wonderful trans community, you know what I mean? It's one of the things that I've absolutely loved about living in D.C. is that, when you live in other places where the queer community isn't A, as out, B, as accepted, C, as diverse, you kind of run into the same people over and over, which isn't necessarily is a bad thing, but I feel like I've learned so much from such a rich community of trans and gender nonconforming people in the D.C. metro area. I thank, every higher power. I thank the Lord for the 9 years that I have been here to be able to meet all these people, yourself included, very largely. I absolutely love getting to sit down and talk to you about some of these issues. So thank you for giving our listeners some of the background on that. Before we because I think that we're at a good place to kind of also talk about some other things about passing, I think that it's probably about time to pay some bills because I'm a little short on cash. I can't pay for the airtime. So, Anise, is it time to pay some bills on the Back to Us Radio Network?
I think we do need to pay some bills, So you're telling me that this month you're not going to write us a check for all of our expenses?
No, and I'm sorry. I'm not able to sign up for that same deal that you're having Ty go through. I'm not on fries at McDonald's this week either. I apologize. I got too busy. I couldn't do it.
Well, Eli, I do have some great news. You won't have to do fries at McDonald's, or you won't have to wash cars in the snow. Do they even wash cars in the snow up there? I've always wondered
that. I hope not. I don't own one, so I couldn't tell you.
You won't have to do either of those things because Kappa Omega Omicron has paid all of our airtime for the entire year.
That is awesome.
I know.
Thank you for taking that off my shoulder.
I know. Breathe. It's like we can stay on the air, and we don't have to worry about how we're going to pay for it because Kappa Omega Omicron Fraternity Incorporated wrote us a check to cover our airtime for the entire year. So a huge thank you to the brothers at Kappa Omega Omicron for loving us the way that you do and for just believing in the show that we are doing. And also, Jen Take Deck Jetson has launched a brand new business. If you heard the show beat tonight, that is actually one of Jen's customs creations. So Jen does amazing show beats, and he does amazing work, period. He's launching a clothing line. I'm like, oh, my gosh, does this guy ever sleep? So, his new company is I think it's iWeird. Yeah, it's iWeird.com. It's on the Back to Us radio page because we were laughing about it today because I was like, did you make a typo in naming that? So anyway, check him out. He's on our Back to Us radio page. Check out Kappa Omega Omicron. And let's see, who else? There was something else. Oh, how could I forget this? Our own LaCara Foster has started a class called Control-Alt-Delete, Reset Your Life, and that starts this Saturday. So, if you want to reset your life, sign up for her class. And tomorrow's show, we're going to the dogs. What does that mean? Well, it's the kickoff of our Puppy Love series for Community Connections. Whew. a whole lot of stuff, Eli.
That was a whole lot of stuff.
That was a whole lot, and I did all that without taking a breath. I'm just good.
Your lungs are getting a little bit too big. It must be all that training for that 5K.
I know, right? Oh, yeah.